The auction lot number was 7,714. Nobody wanted it. That was the first thing Mac Duran noticed when he walked into the salvage yard office on Pell Station. The way the other bidders looked at lot 7,714 on the board and then looked away, like it had done something embarrassing, like it owed them money. He walked to the window, past the coffee machine that had been broken since someone named Goretta had put a boot through it, according to the sign taped above it, past a Dravari broker in a yellow coat, who was laughing with two human dealers about something Mac didn't catch. Out the smudged window, he could see the yard. Most of the lots were clean shapes, old haulers, stripped fighters, a Yenish bulk carrier that had seen better decades. They sat in their berths the way tired things sit, sunk a little, patient. Lot 7,714 was at the back. Even from here, he could see it was wrong. Wrong the way a man with a bad leg walks wrong. The whole shape of it was off. The bow had been crushed inward, and then partially recrushed, like something had hit it, and then something else had hit it harder, and then someone had done extremely poor repair work that had since also been damaged. Whole sections of the outer hull were the wrong color, which meant they'd been replaced with whatever was handy, which meant the original plating was gone, which meant there was a story there that nobody had bothered to write down. It was enormous. That was the second thing. Under all the damage and the grime and the improvised plating, it was an enormous ship, long and low and wide, built like something that was meant to absorb punishment rather than dodge it. Military lines. Old military lines. The kind of frame they hadn't built in 60 years because the new doctrine was speed and the old doctrine was presence. Mac put his coffee down on the windowsill. He looked at the price tag on the board. 4,200 credits, opening bid. He looked at the ship. He looked at the price. He pulled out his card. The Dravari broker's name was Oss, and he found the whole thing funny in the way that people find things funny when they want to feel better about their own choices. Hull plating alone, Mac said. The hull plating is damaged, Oss said. Still plating. You don't know what class she is. She's not in our registry. Probably a knockoff freighter with military cosmetics bolted on. Probably. No manifest. No maintenance history going back more than 40 years. Before that, nothing. Not in any database we have access to. Right. The drives are offline. The internal systems are fried. We did a sweep when she came in and got zero response from anything. She's dead weight, Duran. She's 4,000 credits of scrap that looks like a ship. Max signed the transfer form. Oss took the form. Looked at him. Looked at the ship out the window. Looked at him again with the specific expression of someone who is not going to offer to help you move. She's yours, Oss said. Yes, Max said. He moved in 3 days later. Not into the ship. Not yet. The ship was not livable. The ship was, at this point, mostly holes with walls around them. He moved his things into a berth-side unit on the station, a 4x6 sleeping box with a kitchen unit built into one wall, and every morning he walked across the yard with a flashlight and a bucket and a mop, and he went to work. This was not strange to Mac. This was, in fact, the only kind of work he had ever known. He had spent 22 years in the UHN Maintenance Corps, not fixing weapons, not calibrating drives, cleaning, mop, bucket, rag, vacuum. He had cleaned 17 ships from the inside out, some of them during active deployments, some of them during battles that were close enough that the walls had moved under him. He knew how ships felt. He knew the difference between a structure that was dead and a structure that was resting. The first day, he just walked. He walked with the flashlight and he didn't touch anything and he didn't try to fix anything. He just looked. He went from the bow, what was left of it, all the way to the stern, and then back again, and he paid attention the way you pay attention to a person you're trying to understand. The ship had a shape to its damage. The worst of it was concentrated forward and port side, which meant whatever had hit it had come from the front left, probably multiple times, probably over a sustained period, and whatever had fired on it had been serious about the job. The internal corridors were a mess of sealed blast doors and collapsed sections. Half the lighting was gone, the other half flickered in patterns that didn't match any fault he recognized. On the second day, he started clearing debris. On the third day, he found the corridor. It was on deck 4, midship. The blast door was still sealed, but the manual release worked, which told him the door itself was intact, which was more than he could say for most of the section. He pulled the lever, and the door ground open like it hadn't done this in a while, and wasn't sure it approved. The corridor beyond was burned. Not damaged, burned. There was a difference. Damage was the random result of forces applied. This burning had a direction. Something had come from the aft end of the corridor and moved forward with intent, and it had been hot enough to warp the deck plating and peel the wall panels back like paper. Mac walked through it slowly. At the end of the corridor there was a plaque. Standard military mounting. 2 bolts, rectangular frame, the kind of thing you saw outside briefing rooms and memorial halls. The plate itself was scorched black. He couldn't read what it said. He stood in front of it for a moment with his flashlight pointed at it, and the black surface gave nothing back. He took a photo of it with his comm. He kept walking. On the 7th day, he found the engine room. It was the most intact part of the ship, which made a particular kind of sense. Whoever had designed this vessel had put the engines deep and surrounded them with everything else as a buffer. The drives were offline, stone cold offline, no charge, no residual, nothing. But the housing was clean. The connections were sound. The architecture was old, but it was not broken. He stood in the engine room for a long time. There was something about the size of it. The space was built for a full engineering crew. He could count the stations, count the posts, count the places where people were meant to stand. It was built for maybe 30 people. The consoles were dark and dead. The chairs were still at the stations, some of them turned at angles, like the last person to sit there had just gotten up. He pulled one chair straight. He sat down. He put his flashlight on the console in front of him, and it threw a thin circle of light on the dark screen, and the rest of the room sat in the dark around him, and it was very quiet. He sat there for a while. Then he picked up his mop and went back to work. By day 12, he had cleared decks 4 through 6 well enough to walk them safely. He had cataloged what was working, not much, and what was repairable, more than Oss had suggested, and what was gone beyond recovery, a list he was not ready to write yet. He was in the main corridor of Deck 5, working on a sealed junction panel, when the lights came on. Not all of them, not even most of them. A single strip of emergency lighting along the floor, amber, running from where he was standing toward the ship's bow, then a second strip on the wall, then a third. He stood still. The lights did not go off. He waited 30 seconds. He waited a full minute. The lights stayed on. He looked at the junction panel he had been working on. He had not connected anything. He had been cleaning contacts, that was all. He had not restored any power. There was no power to restore. The drives were dead. The batteries were below threshold. The solar collectors on the outer hull were clogged with 70 years of station grime. He put his hand on the wall. The wall was warm. He took his hand away, kept it away for a moment, put it back. Still warm, not ambient warm, not the warmth of a pressurized corridor that had been sealed, something that was moving, something that was circulating. A sound came from the forward section, low, below hearing almost, more felt than heard, then a click, then another click, then a long mechanical sound that ran the length of the corridor like something waking up one section at a time, one joint at a time, slow and careful. Then silence. Then a voice. It came from the ship's internal comm system, which had not worked, which he had catalogued as non-functional, which was now crackling to life in a speaker panel directly above his head. The voice was female, calm, precise, the kind of voice that had been designed to be audible over engine noise and alarms and chaos, the kind of voice that carried without shouting. Crew complement confirmed. It said, 1. Designation? Mac looked up at the speaker. The speaker looked back at him in the way that speakers do not look back at anything. Mac, he said. Mac Duran. I'm the... He stopped. He had been about to say owner. He said, I live here. A pause. Short. Processing. Crew designation Duran recorded. Rank not confirmed. Defaulting to interim command authority. Another pause. Current hull integrity at 34%. Primary weapon systems offline. Secondary weapon systems offline. Life support at partial function. Navigation offline. Drive systems at 0 charge. Yeah, Mac said. I know. Damage is extensive. Another pause. Longer this time. However. He waited. We are still in the fight, the voice said. Are we not? Mac stood in the amber light of a dead ship's emergency strips with a mop in his hand and the faint smell of old burning still in the air around him. He looked down the corridor. He looked back up at the speaker. "Yeah," he said, "we are." The lights on Deck 5 stayed on all night. For the first time the ship did not yet say how long, someone was home. The AI called herself Aria. She did not offer the name. Mac found it on the 7th morning, stenciled in faded yellow on the panel housing above the primary comm relay. Aria, Autonomous Response and Intelligence Architecture. And he said it out loud, the way you say something when you're not sure if it's a name or a label. And she said, from the nearest speaker, "Yes." That was all. He kept working. She kept watching. That was what she did those first days. Watched, cataloged, spoke only when Mac asked a direct question, or when something he was doing was structurally incorrect. She had opinions about structural correctness. She expressed them in the flat way that someone expresses a thing they have been trained not to force on people but cannot help mentioning. The junction on Section 5C will fail again in approximately 40 hours if the primary brace is not replaced. "I know," Mac said. "The current repair addresses the symptom. I know. The brace itself is—" "I know, Aria." Silence. Then, "Very well." He replaced the brace. She did not say anything about that either. On the 9th day, he asked her how she'd come back on. He was in the engine room, cleaning corrosion off a tertiary relay coupling, which was the kind of work that didn't need his eyes, and so he could ask questions while he did it. "Power bleed from the station's external grid," she said. "Your cleaning of the secondary conduit junctions on day 7 restored enough conductivity for a threshold charge. I required approximately 0.003% of external grid power to initiate core restart." "That's not much." "No." "How long were you offline?" A pause. Not the processing pause. He was beginning to learn the difference. This was a different kind of pause. "My last confirmed timestamp before reactivation," she said, "is 203 years ago." He stopped working. The relay coupling sat in his hand, green with old corrosion, and he looked at it. 200 years, he said. 203, approximately. He put the coupling down on the deck. He picked it back up. He went back to cleaning it. "You didn't know," he said. "I suspected. Internal chronometer decay was consistent with extended dormancy. I did not know the precise duration until I accessed the station's external network." Another pause. The long kind. It was not a pleasant confirmation. He didn't say anything. "I ran diagnostics for 6 hours before speaking to you again," she said. "I needed to." She stopped. "I know," Max said. She didn't say anything after that. He kept cleaning. It was the hull registry number that started it. He'd known he needed to register the ship properly. You couldn't live on an unregistered vessel in a station berth without eventually irritating someone official, and Mac had no interest in irritating anyone official. He pulled the registry number from Aria's records, a string of letters and digits in the old pre-compact format, and he submitted it to the UHN Civilian Records Office, because that was the correct authority, and because Mac did things through correct channels, the way some people do it by habit, and some people do it because they've seen what happens when you don't. The automated response came back in 4 minutes. It said, "Registry number HSV-07714-U is listed as destroyed. Confirmation of destruction on record, dated CE 2203. Please verify vessel identification before submitting duplicate registry claim." He read it twice. He typed, "Vessel is not destroyed. Vessel is in berth 7714, Pell Station, currently under repair. Please advise on process for restoration of active registration." The response this time took 11 hours. It was not automated. It was from a Dr. Marin Voss, Office of Historical Naval Records, and it said, "Mr. Duran, I'll be direct. The registry number you've submitted corresponds to the HSV Unyielding. The Unyielding was confirmed destroyed, in CE 2203, at the Battle of the Combe Passage. She is not a ship you can own. She is a memorial. If this is a genuine inquiry and not an error, I need to speak with you immediately. Please respond." Max sat with that for a while. Then he typed, "I'll talk. Give me a day." He went and found Aria. "Aria," he said, "what ship is this?" She knew what he was asking. He could tell because the pause was the long kind again. "HSV Unyielding. she said. Human space vessel. Designation, Dreadnought class heavy assault carrier. Laid down CE 2178. Commissioned CE 2181. Assigned to the First Fleet, Outer Passage Defense. He stood in the corridor and the amber emergency lighting sat on his shoulders, and he just let her talk. Primary mission, choke point defense during the Kreth engagement of 2203. Secondary mission. She stopped. There was no secondary mission. By the time a secondary mission would have been assigned, the situation had changed. The Battle of Colum Passage, Max said. Yes. You held the passage. The crew held the passage. I held the passage. For 11 days. A pause. 3 colonial evacuation fleets were able to clear the passage and reach safe transit space during that window. 412,700 people. He said nothing. The Kreth committed 14 warships to the engagement by day 4, she said. We were alone. Still nothing. By day 8, we had no forward weapons. By day 10, we had no shields. We held position with hull and mass and the Kreth. She stopped again. This time the stop was different. It was a stop that had something behind it. The Kreth found it difficult to move past us, not for tactical reasons. By that point, we were not a tactical obstacle. Then why? Max said. I don't know, Arya said. I have never known. I have had 200 years to consider it, and I still don't know. What happened on day 11? I lost power. Complete loss. I do not have records of the end of the engagement. She was quiet for a moment. I do not know what happened to the crew. He stood there. The corridor held its breath. Then Max said, I can tell you. He knew, because Dr. Voss had sent him files before he'd replied. Just files, no note. The kind of move that told him she was very good at her job and used to dealing with people who needed facts before they could be ready to talk. The crew of the Unyielding. 340 names. He brought his comm into the corridor, and he stood under the lights, and he read them out loud, one at a time. He did not rush. He did not skip. He read every name in the order they appeared on the manifest, which was alphabetical, which meant he started with Abubakar, James, and ended with Yun, Sora, and between them were 338 other people who had each stood somewhere on this ship during those 11 days and done what needed doing. Arya was silent for the whole reading. When he finished, she was silent for longer. He counted. He didn't mean to. He just did it the way you do something when you're waiting and your mind needs to be pointed at a number. 71 seconds. Then she said, thank you. Just that. Thank you. No one has said their names in a very long time. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would have been worth saying. He put his comm away. He stood in the corridor for another moment. The amber light was steady. No flicker. Somewhere in the forward section, something was running. Some system Arya had brought back online overnight. Some piece of the ship waking up by increments, slow and careful, one thing at a time. He walked back to the engine room. He picked up his tools. He did not make any decisions. He did not announce anything. He did not say to Arya, or to himself, or to the empty ship around him that he had changed his mind about something. He just started on the primary brace. The one he'd been putting off. The one that needed replacing, not patching. The real work, the kind of job you do when you've decided a thing is worth doing right. The tools were loud in the quiet engine room. Arya let him work. Outside, through the hull, muffled, distant, present, the station made its sounds. Docking clamps, passing ships, the ordinary noise of a galaxy going about its business, 340 names unspoken, a corridor still smelling faintly of 200-year-old burning, and a man with a wrench who had not said a single word about what he intended to do next. He didn't need to. The wrench said it. What Mac didn't know, what he wouldn't know for another 6 days, was that Dr. Maren Voss had not kept the registry query to herself. She was a historian. She was careful. She was also human, and the registry number HSV07714-, appearing in an active submission after 2 centuries of confirmed destruction, was the kind of thing that sits in your stomach like a swallowed stone, and she had sent one message, just one, marked personal, unverified, do not distribute, to a colleague at the Naval Archive, who had a colleague at the Bureau of Fleet History, who had a brother-in-law who worked in media. She had not intended for it to go further than the archive. It went further than the archive. The first ship appeared in Pell Station's outer approach lane 4 days later. A news drone, small, fast, with a long-range visual array pointed at berth 7714. Then a second. Then a crewed vessel, civilian, with a broadcast rig on the hull. Then others. Arya noticed them before Mac did. She noticed them the way she noticed everything outside the hull, at long range, automatically, with the part of her that had been built to track threats and catalog movement, and know at all times what was moving around her in space. She tracked them for 6 hours before she mentioned it. "We have eyes on us," she said. Mac looked up from the conduit housing he was rebuilding. "Media," she said. 7 vessels as of this hour, growing. He set down his tools. He walked to the one forward viewport that was still intact, a narrow rectangle of reinforced glass on deck 3, grime-edged but functional, and he looked out. 7 ships, clustered in the outer approach. Some of them had lights pointing at the station, at this berth, at her. He stood at the viewport for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, just that." He went back to the conduit housing. The work was not finished. It would take longer than he'd thought when he started, and it would cost more than he had, and there were 100 things on this ship that needed doing before he could honestly say he was close to done. That was fine. He had done complicated jobs before. He picked up his tools and he kept working, and outside in the dark, the ships gathered, and the galaxy began to remember a name it had spent 200 years turning into myth, and Mac Duran worked in the engine room of a legend and didn't look up again until the lights in that section finally, properly, fully, came on. The first message came from a journalist named Paul Eris, who described himself as a cultural heritage correspondent and wanted to know if Mac had considered the symbolic weight of his discovery. Mac had not. He said so. Paul Eris sent 14 follow-up messages in the next 6 hours. Mac read the first 3, stopped reading after the word epochal, and went back to work on the forward conduit relay that had been giving Arya trouble since Tuesday. The second message came from the UHN Bureau of Fleet Memory, which was an organization Mac had not known existed, requesting that he cease all repair activity on the vessel, pending a formal heritage assessment that would take approximately 18 months to schedule. He set the message aside. The third message came from a woman named Admiral Sarah Koss, Office of Fleet Command, and it said, "Mr. Duran, I'm coming to see the ship. I'll be there in 4 days. This is not a request." He read that one twice. Then he told Arya about it. "I know," Arya said. "I've been monitoring her vessel since it entered the outer approach lane. She came faster than 4 days. She's been in the station for 6 hours. Mac put down his coffee. "She's being careful," Arya said. "She walked the outer berth twice before approaching. She's trying to decide something." "What?" "Whether to believe it." Sarah Koss was younger than he'd expected. Not young, not raw young, not new to this young, but young enough that the rank on her collar still sat slightly ahead of the face below it, the way a uniform fits before the person fully grows into what it means. She stood at the berth entrance and looked at the ship for a long time before she looked at Mac. "Hull number," she said. 7714, Mac said. -U. She looked back at the ship. "She's a mess," Koss said. "She is," Mac said. "You've done repairs." "Some. How much is original?" "More than you'd think." Koss stepped forward. Stopped. The kind of stop that isn't hesitation. The kind that's choice. She touched the hull with one hand, flat-palmed, the way you touch something when you need to know if it's real, and your eyes have stopped being enough. She stood like that for a moment. "Walk me through her," she said. He did. He showed her the damage the way he would show anyone around. Not narrating, not presenting, just pointing at things in the order you encountered them, moving from bow to stern. He showed her the forward section where the hull had been replaced 4 or 5 times over by previous owners with whatever was cheap and available. He showed her the burned corridor on deck 4. He did not say anything about the plaque. She saw it and stopped and looked at it, the blackened rectangle on the scorched wall, and she did not ask what it said. She already knew she couldn't read it. She already knew what it was for. He showed her the engine room. She stood in the center of it and turned slowly, and he watched her count the stations. He'd done the same thing himself, that first time, and her face did what faces do when the number they arrive at is larger than the feeling they were prepared to have. Arya, Mac said. Admiral Koss, Arya said from the speaker above them. Koss went still. Your file indicates you were commissioned 6 years ago at Reach Station, Arya said. You have 17 engagements on record, 11 decisive. A pause. You would have qualified for this crew. The thing that happened on Koss's face was not something Mac had words for. Not pride. Not grief. Something that lived in the territory between them where they share a border. She evaluates everyone, Mac said. I was built to, Arya said. I needed to know my crew. Koss looked at the speaker for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, You've been alone for 200 years. Yes, I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Admiral. I know, Koss said. I'm sorry anyway. Arya said nothing. The engine room held the three of them, one admiral, one janitor, one 200-year-old mind in the walls, and the silence was the specific kind that nobody wants to be the first to break. Mac broke it. Coffee? The media count reached 31 ships on the day Counselor Veth arrived. Mac saw him on the external feed. Arya had restored the external cameras, patchy but functional. A syndicate diplomatic shuttle, silver and clean. The kind of vessel that was designed to communicate its own importance from a distance. It docked at the station's formal berth, 2 levels up from the salvage yard, which was its own kind of message. Veth was Yenish, long-limbed, pale-scaled, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in rooms where things were decided for long enough that they no longer needed to perform composure. He had a title that ran 6 words long in the syndicate's formal register. Mac looked it up, read it, and remembered none of it. He came alone. That was the first thing Mac noticed. No aides, no recording crew, no witnesses. He came alone to a salvage berth at Pell Station, and he stood at the entrance of the berth and he looked at the unyielding the way the Dravari broker, Oss, had looked at her at the auction. Like something that had done something embarrassing. Like something that owed someone a debt it had no business still carrying. Mr. Duran, he said, may I come in? Sure, Mac said. He didn't want to see the ship. That was the second thing Mac noticed. Veth stood at the berth entrance and spoke to the space between them, and did not let his eyes rest on the hull for more than a second at a time, the way you don't look directly at a bright light. I'll be direct, Veth said. Please, Mac said. The unyielding presents a problem. He folded his long hands together. Not politically, legally. There is a clause in the Pax Column Treaty, the treaty that ended the Kreth engagement, that specifically addresses the disposal of weapons used at the Column Passage. The Kreth insisted on it. Certain vessels were to be considered permanently decommissioned. The unyielding was at the top of that list. She was listed as destroyed, Mac said. She was. That satisfied the clause, technically. A pause. A living vessel, restored, crewed, operational, is another matter. Under treaty law, the unyielding active and functional is an act of war. The berth was quiet. Mac looked at his hands. He had grease on his left knuckle from the relay work this morning. He rubbed at it with his thumb. I'm not asking you to understand the politics, Veth said. I'm asking you to understand the consequence. If this ship is restored, the Kreth will have legal standing to consider it a hostile act. What follows from that is not something I can predict, but I can tell you the syndicate cannot protect a single civilian with a salvage license from the diplomatic weight of a violated treaty. He said it without menace. That was what made it land. She'd have to be destroyed, Mac said, or surrendered to the syndicate for permanent decommission, which amounts to the same thing. Veth's expression was the expression of a man delivering a diagnosis he did not enjoy. I am genuinely sorry, Mr. Duran. I know what this ship means. I know what it means to your people. I am not asking you to feel good about this. The berth held the silence. A ship passed somewhere outside. A big one, close, the vibration of it running through the deck plating under Mac's feet. She's a private vessel, Mac said, licensed and registered. The registration is contested. Licensed and registered, Mac said again. Under civilian maritime law, my name is on the deed. You want her, bring a judge. Veth looked at him. Mac looked back. There was something in Veth's expression that was not surprise, more like a man encountering something he had been told about but had not quite believed. He looked at Mac the way you look at a small structural feature that is somehow bearing a load it has no business bearing. That will not end well for you, Veth said. Maybe not, Mac said. Veth left the way he came. Alone, clean shuttle, formal berth. Max stood in the berth entrance and watched the shuttle lift and disappear into the station's upper transit lanes. "Arya," he said. "I heard," she said. He stood there a moment longer. "You know what the Kreth clause is really about," Arya said. "Yeah," Max said. "It wasn't about the treaty. It was never about the treaty. It was about the Kreth remembering 11 days and a ship that would not move, and not wanting anyone else to remember it the same way they did. Some things you destroy because they are dangerous. Some things you destroy because they are true." He walked back inside. That night, late, station dark, the media ships lit up in the outer approach like a new constellation. Max sat in the engine room with a cup of coffee, and the only light was Arya's status panel running green down one wall. He didn't say anything for a long time. Arya didn't either. That was something he had come to appreciate about her. She did not fill silences out of discomfort. She was 200 years old, and she had earned the right to let a quiet room be quiet. "They want you gone," he said. "They have always wanted that," Arya said. "The Kreth spent 11 days trying to make it happen." "Veth says." "I know what Veth says." Mac looked at the coffee in his hands. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. "You're afraid," Arya said. Not an accusation, an observation, the same tone she used to report hull integrity. "I'm a janitor," Mac said. "I bought a ship to live on. I didn't sign up for any of this." "No," Arya said. "You didn't." He looked up at the status panel. Green lines running steady. "None of my crew signed up for 11 days either," she said. "They signed up for an assignment. The 11 days arrived and they were already there." He sat with that. The station made its sounds around them, distant and ordinary. The sounds of a galaxy that had been going about its business for 200 years, while this ship sat silent in the dark. "What do you want?" he asked. He had not asked before. He realized that now. He had been asking what she knew, what she could do, what she remembered. He had not asked what she wanted. The pause was long. "To not be destroyed," she said. "Not for my sake, for theirs." The crew. 340 names in alphabetical order. Max set the cold coffee down on the deck. He stood up. He picked up his tools. There was a power coupling on deck 2 that needed replacing before Arya could bring the secondary systems fully online. And it was late, and he was tired, and the work would take most of the night. He went to do it anyway. Outside, 31 ships waited. The galaxy held its breath. Mac Duran went to work. The first volunteer showed up on a Tuesday. Mac didn't hear him come aboard. He was deep in the portside weapons housing on deck 2, both arms inside a conduit cavity that smelled like burned decades, when Arya said, "Someone is at the berth entrance. Tell him to go away." "I told her," Arya said. "She is still there." He pulled his arms out, wiped his hands on his pants, walked to the forward hatch and looked down at the berth. A woman, young, close-cropped hair, a mechanic's bag over one shoulder, the kind of boots that had been resoled at least twice. She looked up at him with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this and was choosing not to use it. "I'm Deo," she said. "I work engine systems. I've worked engine systems for 12 years. I'm good at it." "I'm not hiring," Max said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking to be hired." He looked at her. She looked back. "Deck 5, he said. "The secondary coupling array. Portside housing is jammed. Has been for a week." "I'll find it," she said, and came aboard. By Friday there were 6 of them. Nobody asked Mac if that was all right. They just appeared, 1 or 2 at a time, the way things accumulate when you leave a door open. A retired UHN engineer named Cass, who had the specific competence of someone who had fixed broken things under fire, and found civilian work boring since. A young Dravari hull technician named Sek, who worked in silence and whose presence Mac only registered through the sound of correct work being done in sections he hadn't gotten to yet. 2 humans whose names he kept mixing up, but whose work he didn't. None of them talked about the ship. Not directly. Not the way the journalists did. Not the way the messages in his inbox did. 1,600 of them now, unopened past the first 30. They talked about systems. They talked about what was fixable and what wasn't, and what would need sourcing from off-station, and how much that would cost, and whether there was a workaround. They treated the unyielding the way you treat a patient. Not a monument. Mac found he could work in a room with people who treated her like a patient. Admiral Koss had not left. She had sent a message to Fleet Command on day 2 that said, in its entirety, staying on site for assessment. Duration unknown. Fleet Command had replied with 3 increasingly formal queries. She had replied to none of them. She was now sleeping in a berthside unit 2 doors down from Mac's and spending her days aboard, and she had stopped wearing her rank insignia sometime around day 4, which Mac noticed but did not mention. She was useful. That was the other thing. She knew ship systems the way people know systems when they have trusted their lives to them, not theoretically, not by diagram, but by the specific grammar of how things fail, and why, and what you do about it. She and Arya had long technical conversations that ran for hours, while Mac worked nearby. Arya walking Koss through the original design specs, Koss suggesting modern alternatives, both of them speaking in the shorthand of people who share a professional language. She likes you, Mac told Koss one evening. She evaluates, Koss said. That's how she likes people. Koss said nothing. She was looking at a drive schematic on her comm. After a moment she said, "She told me this morning that my targeting instincts are sound, but my patience for siege engagement is underdeveloped." What did you say? I said she'd been offline for 200 years and should maybe reserve judgment. What did she say? She said, Koss stopped. Something moved across her face. The same thing from the engine room, that territory between pride and grief. She said the patience develops. She said she'd seen it develop in officers who thought they didn't have it. Mac looked at the schematic over her shoulder. She said that about your crew, he said. I know, Koss said. They did not say anything else about it. Arya woke him at 0300 on a Wednesday. Not the comm, the lights in his berthside unit. Arya had worked out how to reach him through the station's power grid, which was either impressive or alarming, and Mac had decided not to examine which. You need to see something, she said. He pulled on his boots, crossed the yard, came up the forward hatch to deck 3 and the intact viewport. Outer approach, Arya said. 14 degrees above the station's primary transit plane. He looked. It took him a moment. It was big. That was the first thing. Big in the way that military vessels were big, which was different from the way civilian vessels were big. Civilian vessels were big because they were full of things. Military vessels were big because they were built to mean something at a distance, long and dark and running minimal lights, the kind of profile you ran when you did not want to be seen but also did not particularly care if you were. Kreth. He had never seen a Kreth warship in person. He had seen images. The images did not convey the way the thing just sat there, the way it occupied space with the particular patience of something that had nowhere else it needed to be. What class? He said. Dominion class heavy enforcer, Arya said. We have met this class before. At Colum. Yes, they deployed 4 of this class on day 3. A pause. This vessel is not targeting us. It is not in an attack posture. It is watching. Mac looked at the Kreth ship. The Kreth ship looked back. In the outer approach, the media vessels had gone very quiet. Their running lights were all still on, but none of them were moving. The whole visible slice of space around Pell Station had the texture of a room where everyone has simultaneously decided not to speak first. They remember you, Mac said. Yes, Arya said. Does it bother you? The pause was long, the specific long kind. No, she said. It does not bother me. They should remember. He went to work. That was the only honest answer he had to a Kreth warship sitting 14 degrees above the transit plane, watching him with the full weight of what it was. He went to work. He went back down to the port-side weapons housing on deck 2, and he put his arms back into the conduit cavity, and he kept going. Arya talked him through it. She had been doing this more. Not just reporting, teaching, walking him through the weapons systems the same way she had walked through the engine systems, the same way she had walked through navigation, through life support, through every system on the ship one at a time, slowly, in the language of someone who is not assuming knowledge and not condescending about its absence. He was not a soldier. He had never been a soldier. He had cleaned the rooms where soldiers lived and worked, and that was the closest he had ever come to it, and there was no version of him that was going to learn tactics or strategy or engagement doctrine. But he understood machines. He understood how they were supposed to work and how they failed and what the difference sounded like and felt like and smelled like. He understood it the way some people understand languages, not from study, from immersion, from 22 years of putting his hands inside the bodies of ships and learning their grammar. Arya knew that. She taught him accordingly. Primary rail assembly, she said. Third coupling from the housing base. You'll feel a resistance at about 6 centimeters. That's the lockout. Bypass it with the flat tool, not the driver. The driver will strip it. Mac felt the resistance. Used the flat tool. The lockout released. Good, Arya said. The assembly behind it is original. 203 years old. It is also undamaged. He put his hand on it. He put his hand on it. Cold metal, clean lines. They built things to last, he said. They built things for a war they thought might never end, Arya said. That produces a certain quality of construction. He worked in silence for a while. Primary weapons, he said. Where are we? 41% before today. The work you're doing now will bring the portside rail assembly to functional. A pause. 61% on completion. And targeting? Calibration is half done. I can finish it. I've been waiting for your instruction. He sat in the housing with the 200-year-old assembly under his hand. Outside, 14 degrees above the transit plane, the Kreth ship watched. He thought about Veth, the clean shuttle and the careful words and the treaty clause that was not really about a treaty. He thought about 340 names in alphabetical order. He thought about 11 days. He pulled himself out of the housing, sat on the deck, looked at Arya's nearest camera, the one in the upper corner of the corridor, the one she watched him through when they talked. Finish it, he said. Arya did not say anything right away. She had been designed, 200 years ago, by people who understood that there were moments that did not need commentary, that you could build that into an AI, the same way you could build a weapons system or a life support array, as a deliberate choice, a piece of engineering, something that served a function. The function it served now was to let the moment sit exactly as heavy as it was. Then, calibration will be complete in approximately 4 hours. Okay, Mac said. He stood up. Mac, Arya said. He stopped. The crew would have liked you, she said. He stood in the corridor with the amber light and the smell of old burning, and the weight of that sitting on him, the same way the ship's mass sat in its berth, not pressing down, just present, solid, the kind of thing you know is there without having to look. He picked up his tools. He went back to work. 4 hours later, deep in the belly of a 200-year-old warship that the galaxy had spent 2 centuries calling a ghost, the targeting systems of the HSV Unyielding came fully online. Green across the board. Clean, precise, ready. Outside, the Kreth ship had not moved. It was still watching. Good, Mac thought. Let it watch. The impound order came at 0600. Mac read it at 0604 while standing in the engine room with a cup of coffee that was still hot for once, which felt like the universe making a small and pointless gesture. Counselor Veth had filed through the Syndicate's Emergency Maritime Authority. 14 pages. Clean language. Airtight, probably. Veth was the kind of man whose paperwork was airtight before he opened his mouth. The order gave Mac 72 hours to surrender the vessel, or face forcible impound by Syndicate Enforcement Fleet, which was, as of this morning, present in the outer approach in numbers that Arya had been counting since 0200. 11 ships. He read the order twice. He drank his coffee. He put the mug down on the console that had belonged, 200 years ago, to an engineer named Okafor, Blessing, which he knew because he had read that name out loud in a corridor 3 weeks ago, and because he had not stopped knowing it since. Arya, he said. 11 Syndicate enforcement vessels, she said. 2 of them are armed. The other 9 are bureaucratic, legal presence, witness ships. And the Kreth? Still there. 14 degrees above the transit plane, unchanged. He looked at the mug on Okafor's console. He picked it back up. Kos, he said. Already on the bridge, Arya said. She's been there since 0530. The bridge. He had not called it that until now. In his head, it had been the forward command room, the big deck, the space up front with the dead screens, practical names, maintenance names. Kos had started calling it the bridge on day 3, and he had not corrected her, and somewhere in the past 2 weeks, it had become the bridge again, 200 years of calling it nothing finally over. She was at the main console when he arrived. Not sitting, standing, both hands on the console edge, looking at the approach display Arya had restored 4 days ago. The display was functional but old. Vectors in amber, ships as shapes rather than detail. Clean enough. She had her insignia on. He noticed that. She had put them back on sometime this morning, the rank on her collar sitting exactly where rank sat on a person who had finished growing into what it meant. They're going to move at 0700, she said. Probably. We have targeting, she said. You know that. I know. 61% weapons. Primary rail assembly operational. Syndicate enforcement vessels are light armored. We could... No, Mac said. She looked at him. He looked at the display. 11 ships, amber shapes, moving in the slow, patient geometry of things that have the legal weight of an institution behind them and know it. Then what? Goss said. Mac put both hands in his pockets. We hold position, he said. The volunteers were on the ship. All of them. Nobody had called a meeting. Nobody had sent a message. They had simply arrived, one by one, the way they had always arrived. Dio, with her mechanic's bag. Cass with his coffee. Sec with silence and the sound of correct work. Except there was no work this morning. Just presence. Just the 6 of them distributed across the ship's decks, standing or sitting near their stations, doing nothing, being there. Mac walked deck 5 at 0650. He did not say anything to any of them. They did not say anything to him. That was fine. He stopped at the viewport on deck 3. The approach was thick with ships now. The Syndicate 11, the Media Cluster, the Kreth shape sitting dark and still above the transit plane. And further out, at the edge of the display range, the ordinary traffic of a busy station going about its morning. He watched the Syndicate ships begin their slow convergence. Not fast. Legal motion. The motion of something that believes the paperwork has already done the work, and the physical presence is just ceremony. He watched them. He put one hand on the viewport glass. Cold. The glass was always cold. The ship ran warm inside, but the glass was always cold, and you could feel the outside through it. The vacuum, the nothing, the space that the unyielding had been holding her piece of for 3 weeks. The first ship appeared on the display at 0658. Not Syndicate, too small. Civilian registry. Arya called it before Mac could ask. A Class 3 cargo hauler, the kind of ship that moved mid-bulk freight between stations and smelled, internally, of synthetic rubber and old coffee and the specific exhaustion of crews who spent their lives in transit. No weapons, no armor. Running speeds that made the Syndicate vessels look sculpted. It moved into the approach lane between the unyielding and the nearest Syndicate ship, and stopped. Mac looked at the display. Who is that? Koss said. Registry says the Marin's Luck, Arya said. Civilian cargo. Out of reach station. No current manifest filed. The Marin's Luck sat in the lane and did not move. Then a second ship appeared. Medical registry. White hull. The red bar markings of an independent clinic vessel. It moved into the approach at low speed, and settled 200 meters off the Marin's Luck's port side and stopped. Then a third. A mining barge. Heavy. Slow. Shaped like something that was designed to take punishment from asteroid fields, and found the comparison to warships mildly amusing. It came in from the upper approach and dropped anchor between the medical ship and the nearest Syndicate vessel, and its running lights pulsed once, not a signal, just the lights cycling, the way they always cycled, and then it was still. Max stood at the viewport. His hand was still on the glass. Arya, he said. I see them, she said. More. A Dravari freighter. The kind of long-hulled design that looked like someone had stretched a ship past the point of comfort, and then kept going. A passenger liner, mid-range, with its external observation deck lights still on from the overnight transit. A construction platform, barely mobile, that should not by any engineering logic have been in a station approach lane at all but was, somehow, present, its massive silhouette dropping into the cluster with the determination of something that has decided it is going to be somewhere and is going to be there, regardless of what the manuals say about operational parameters. They were not in formation. Formation implied planning. Formation implied someone had given an order, run a drill, filed a transit plan. This was not formation. This was the thing that happens when a lot of individual things make the same choice at the same time, for their own separate reasons, and the result looks, from outside, like coordination. It was not coordination. It was agreement. The Syndicate ships had stopped moving. At 0702, 2 minutes after the legal window opened, 2 minutes during which the enforcement fleet had not advanced a single meter. The first warship appeared. UHN Registry. A midweight patrol vessel. Not large. Not the kind of ship that changed tactical calculations on its own. It moved in from the far approach. Navigation lights clean and exact. And it placed itself in the growing cluster, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has thought carefully about where they want to stand, and has stood there. Then another. Then 3 more. Koss made a sound. Small. The kind of sound that is not a word but is also not nothing. The sound of a person who has spent their life doing math, and has just arrived at a number that is larger than the equation suggested. They're not responding to orders, she said. No, Arya said. I didn't order this, Koss said. No, Arya said, again. You didn't. 47 ships. Civilian, military, medical, industrial. 3 different species registry markings in the cluster. One Yenish independent hauler had come in from the nightside approach, and parked itself with no apparent concern for the diplomatic implications, which was either brave or oblivious, and Max suspected the latter, and respected it equally. The syndicate fleet had not moved. The Kreth ship had not moved. Nothing had moved. The approach was full of vessels that had no legal standing, no weapons that mattered, no orders, no plan, nothing except the fact of their presence, which was the only thing, it turned out, that was needed. Max stood at the viewport. He was still standing there at 0800 when Arya said, Counselor Veth is requesting a channel. Open it, Koss said. Veth's voice came through the bridge speakers, calm. Still the voice of a man delivering a diagnosis. Except something in the calibration was different. Some frequency in the careful words. Mr. Duran, Veth said. Counselor, Max said. A pause. The enforcement order, Veth said, is being reviewed. Max said nothing. There are, a pause, longer, the kind that has something behind it. There are questions about the legal standing of the treaty clause, as applied to a privately registered civilian vessel. These questions were raised by our own legal division this morning. The review will take some time. Koss looked at Mac. Mac looked at the display. 47 ships, more arriving. The cluster had become something with mass, with gravity, the kind of thing that changed the calculation of everything near it just by being there. I see, Mac said. The enforcement fleet will stand down pending review, Veth said. All right, Mac said. The channel closed. Koss let the silence run for 5 seconds. Then she said, the treaty clause was always bluff. Yeah, Mac said. He knew it. You knew it. I suspected it. You didn't blink. He looked at the display. The syndicate ships were moving now, slowly, the careful geometry of retreat that does not want to look like retreat. The cluster of civilian and military vessels held their positions, unhurried, watching the enforcement fleet withdraw with the patient attention of things that intend to remain. The Kreth ship, still there, unchanged, dark and still at 14 degrees above the transit plane. Then, at 0814, on Arya's clock, it moved. Not toward them, away. Slow turn, no hurry. The movement of a thing that has seen what it came to see, and has made whatever internal record it came to make, and is now leaving, because the record is complete. It cleared the outer approach at 0831 and did not come back. The cluster of ships was still there, growing, still, new arrivals slotting in without instruction, taking the space that was available, just there. Arya had stopped counting at 90, then at 100. At 0923 she said, crew complement confirmed. Mac was in the corridor, walking toward the engine room out of habit, out of the 22-year reflex of a man who responds to stress by finding something that needs fixing, and he stopped. Current crew complement aboard the unyielding 6. Arya's voice was the calibrated voice, the built voice, the one designed for engine noise and alarms and chaos. Vessels in formation, acknowledging flagship status, 4,412. He stood in the corridor. The amber light was steady. Somewhere behind him, Koss was on the bridge. The volunteers were at their stations. The unyielding sat in her berth with 61% of her weapons hot and her drive still cold, and her hull at 53% integrity after 3 weeks of work, which was not enough, and also everything, a thing that had no business being present, that was present anyway, stubbornly, in the way that some things simply refuse the available conclusions. Flagship status, Mac said. Confirmed, Arya said. He stood there a moment, then he walked to the burned corridor on deck 4. He had been cleaning it for 3 weeks, not urgently, between other jobs, an hour here, 20 minutes there, the slow, patient work of removing 2 centuries of carbon and heat damage from a surface that had not asked to be restored, but had not resisted it either. He stood in front of the plaque. The frame was still scorched at the edges. The bolts were original. He had not replaced them, had cleaned them instead, hour after hour, until the metal beneath the black came back. The plate itself had taken the most time. It had taken all 3 weeks, and a chemical compound Cass had sourced from a specialty supplier off-station, and Mac's own hands working in the patience of someone who is not in a hurry, because he has decided the thing is worth the time. He could read it now. 6 words. That was all. 6 words in the old UHN engraving standard, the deep-cut military font that was supposed to last, that had lasted, that had come through 11 days and a Kreth engagement, and 200 years of Dark and Mac Duran's hands, and a chemical compound, and 3 weeks of patience, and the words were, "She will hold." He stood in front of it. The ship held its breath around him. All 53% of her, all the original hull and the patched sections and the restored systems and the 200-year-old rail assembly under his hands, and Okafor's console, and the amber lighting that had come on in the dark 3 weeks ago because a janitor had cleaned a conduit junction and given something enough charge to wake. "Aria," he said. "Yes." She held, he said. The pause was not the processing pause, not the long, sad pause. It was something else. Something Mac did not have a full name for, except that it was the sound of a 200-year-old mind that had spent a very long time in the dark, arriving, at last, at a morning. "Yes," Aria said. She did. He found the mop in the supply closet on Deck 5 at 0947. His mop, the one he'd brought aboard day 1, the one that had been leaning in that closet for 3 weeks while bigger work crowded it out. He pulled it out, checked the head, still good. He filled the bucket at the utility station. He went to work on Deck 4. There was a lot of ship left to clean. He started at the bow and worked toward the stern, the way you did it, the way you always did it, because that was the correct direction, and Mac Duran did things the correct way, not because someone was watching, but because the ship deserved it. Outside, 4,412 ships held their positions in the dark. The galaxy remembered a name. The mop moved.